Welcome back. Education is just one of several sectors Mexico's new president vowed to reform when he took office. Others include energy and the country's taxation system. Joining us now to talk more about Mexico's education overhaul and other reforms is America's Now political commentator Laura Carlsen. Laura, thank you so much and welcome to the show. How will the education reform create real change?
I think it will create real change. The question is whether it will create real change in the area to which it's directed, which is improving the quality of public education. When you look closely at this reform, what you see is it's really more a labor reform than an educational reform. What it does is it changes the status of the teachers from the regular labor laws to being somewhat more like administrative employees, and that's precisely what they're objecting to at this point.
Laura, how difficult will it be to implement the education reform? Do you see an easy time from here, or do you anticipate more hurdles with the unions to overcome?
We've already seen those hurdles, and I think it's far more than the government anticipated. The teachers have literally been in the streets of Mexico City, and not just Mexico City, but every state in the country for the past month. They're protesting, and they're not about to back down. So I think the president perhaps thought that this would be far easier than it's been, and yet because of these changes in their labor rights and what they feel, they are continuing with the opposition. Now, we're seeing a process of negotiation, and in fact, there have been some changes in the reforms. Of course, the reforms have already passed the legislative process, and what's in question right now is the demand of the teachers' movement to repeal the reforms. And there have been some changes within that process, but still the core of the disagreement exists. And what we're seeing right now is that they're not about to back down.
Well, there's one problem the teachers have had, and it has to do with the evaluation tests they are being asked to take. If you're a qualified teacher, you really shouldn't have anything to fear, right?
Well, that's right, Elaine, in a general sense. But the core, again, of the disagreement with the evaluation that's written into the Constitution now as a result of the reforms is what kind of evaluation are we talking about and how will it be applied? The teachers are saying, sure, evaluate us. We are not against evaluation. But it's absolutely unfair to apply a standardized evaluation, and now they're saying that they're going to try to make it a little bit more flexible, when the context of education and also of teacher training within the country is so diverse. So they're coming back to the government and saying, evaluate the president. What we've gotten is an education system where we're not the only problem. It's an education system that's been abandoned by the government, that's underfunded, and in order to tackle the problems with the education system, you have to not just impose an examination on teachers, but have a far more wide-reaching reforms within the sector that include resources, equality, and an education more focused on diversity and human development.
Let's move away from education for just a moment. The president entered office earlier this year with a reform agenda that he said would help improve the economy. Can you talk to us about the other items on his agenda besides education?
The two major ones that are on the table right now have been presented, we know the details of them, are the fiscal reform and the oil reform, the energy sector reform. These are also very controversial within Mexico. Now, the fiscal reform, everything practically that President Peña Nieto wants to do in Mexico will depend on the fiscal reform, because unless he has a better tax base in order to promote some of the social programs and other kinds of programs that he has in mind, he won't be able to pull it off. Even more controversial is the energy sector reform. The energy sector was nationalized in 1938, and it wasn't just a decision of the president, but the entire society was involved in taking back this natural resource that belonged to the nation out of the hands of transnational companies that were obviously abusing their access to Mexican resources. So it's this huge point of national pride within Mexico. And the idea of changing the Constitution to allow transnationals to come back in and to exploit and do exploration in the oil sector is something that's going to be a flashpoint. It already is a flashpoint. We've already seen demonstrations here in Mexico society. Many people are against it. There's political parties that are organizing against it, and there's citizen groups that are organizing against it. So again, it's going to be a rough ride for Peña Nieto to pass these reforms within the country, if indeed he can in these forms.
Well, what does it say that he was actually able to help pass education reform? Would that be considered a victory for him in the sense?
Yes, it's definitely a victory, and we've seen a number of victories like that because he has been able to have major achievements within the legislative sector. And he's likely to have success in the Congress with the other reforms as well. There's something called a pact for Mexico that was made between all the major parties that are saying, yes, we need some reforms and we will support the president in general terms on these. Even the center-left party, which in the past has been against these kinds of structural reforms, it's experienced kind of a transition and has come on board basically with this. So in some ways, he's going to have greater problems in the streets than he is in the legislative. And that's not a small thing in Mexico, because Mexican society has the capacity to organize when it wants to and make changes even when, again, we've gotten approval in the Congress. By mobilizing in the street, by forcing negotiation processes, and especially in instances where it's something that they feel is going to have a direct impact on them, like all these reforms will, and also that was not properly consulted or negotiated before it was pushed through Congress.
Laura Carlsen, thank you as always for your time and your insight.